times and challenges. It is by Dr. Jitendra Nagpal, who is a senior consultant in Multan Medicity and a senior psychiatrist, and Ms. Lakshmi Kumar, Director PNS and the Orchid School, who is an intercultural training specialist.
It's indeed an honor to be part of this prestigious dialogue with these school leaders across the country. And a greater honor is to be next to them, sitting here with me. And what we understand in the panel, very well articulated by all the speakers, to set the ball rolling for the next level of leadership in schools. Nonetheless, the two catchwords which often come to our minds when we look at possibilities of 21st century learning. I think we all meet heads and concur the opinion. Leadership, empowerment, decentralizing the idea of child development, and many more, the psyche of school leaders. So it's time that we actually platforms with such erudite gatherings, that do we need to go not to one higher level, but even time at the same level and review what we are doing in the context of child-centered education and not pedagogy-centered. What we have decided together that yes, idea of ending into discourse. Let's have some thoughts which the nation, we need to, if nation and India can be a goal, let's down to what we in the classroom, in the school, the inclusivity of a school, and maybe the non-education partnerships outside the schools. What you see here is way back, than 60 years back, when the WHO was founded. One of these persons who was the founders, and echoes the sentiments that we need to allow ourselves to be a little bit more closer to the heart and soul of children when it comes to looking at the good schools. And does it become a greater school? Does it become the best school? It will be very, very relative. But the fact that children are happy going to school, it's a well-being population, what the title is now for this small dialogue. We need to then see what are the increasing demands coming from a democratic institution called the school. The first demand, to our best understanding, is what we are all learning together. That understand me better. I'm a growing human being in a complex, diverse, most remarkable society of the world. You don't have anywhere so many languages in a classroom, so many cultures in a school, so many diversities of even digital networking in a school. Forget about the type of offerings a school can actually give. So if we are looking at a world where we agree what Gandhi said, in fact, this was when he was in the Avada jail in Pune, that we have taken this world from children for a short while only, we owe it back to them. Are we giving it back to them in the shape and the form and the content and the methodology that we are supposed to be leading the nation? Well, it's a matter of thought. The answer was yes or no, we don't know. But today, going by certain parameters, it seems that schools are the only platform for governance of a nation. And not that NCERT or CBSE or HRD define what we need to look at a possibility of a nation, but it's also important, irrespective of the board, it could be IB, CSE, but what is the purpose of me going to a school? What are the experiences sharing as a child or receiving from my pedagogy, in my parents, my school partnerships, and maybe are they being meaningfully organized? And lastly, if it is being, then are they being measured? It was very nice to hear the previous panel to talk about how outcomes need to be looked into rather than the processes only, because outcomes are school leaderships, are school leaders. What is the outcome in terms of psychosocial well-being, or maybe the special need population, or maybe even the achievements in academics? But if these four key words, purpose, experience, how they organize in the school, and are they being accomplished, can be kept in mind as suggested by the last NCF by the government, I think every system falls under this goal and objective. So before we actually have the dialogue on this, Can I have an opinion from all of you, both behalf of Lakshmi ji and myself? In your opinion, if you can spend 5 seconds on these 4 or 5 parameters, which one would be the most important for you as a school leader for a child-friendly school? I know the best answer would be that all are important. But can you look at something that strikes you the most in terms of creating a happy, well-being environment for a school? Because we have the average being 2,000 to 3,000 kids in one school. Where are those parameters besides being accredited to a given system? Does that come to your thinking? Quality teaching learning. Excellent, ma'am. That then probably balls into the one which you're looking at, the second one. I'm sure you have quality learning environment as the next. Why quality teaching learning, if I can ask you, ma'am, came to your mind the first? Yeah. Okay, good. And also, you are indirectly promoting the environment.
Environment,
outside.
yeah.
You are anyway identifying the learners at the entry point and also promoting them based on the curriculum you're following.
Definitely.
So most of the other things happen spontaneously if the teaching learning process can be taken care by the school leaders.
Yes.
So what would be at least those 3 parameters to define a quality teaching learning process? Only the syllabi and the curriculum? Anybody else? We know that, quality curriculum comes to our mind first when we look at teaching learning process. But we have learned slowly from children that please get to know the difference between a syllabus and a curriculum. Because they know that if syllabus plus life skills, plus values and plus human development is added, then probably I am receiving the better learning process. So when we're looking at the small dialogue of well-being, I think from literacy to education, from education to human development and therefore child development, I think school leaders like all of you here actually look at a holistic child development as a parameter, not just education and literacy, because it's way, way back then and you're way, way forward then as role models. You are allowing experiencing more than learning, because learning then becomes complete and metaphorical also. You are allowing a lot of questioning to the answers of the teachers, not of the students. You allow that platform of pedagogy being questioned by children. You allow participation as the first parameter rather than observing. Then Vygotsky included as one of the parameters where we look at, say, the temperament of children. A lot of good research. Ma'am will share that. Every student as a teacher and every teacher as a learner. Why we are sharing this? Because I'll end with these couple of slides, because it's time that we also yearn to understand that you are the role model, you are the school leaders, you are the people who will lay down the thinking processes for those have-not schools who may be just minuscule in their identity, but the largest majority of the nation. I come to understand that, for example, if CBSE is 1% schools of the country, 1%, 14,000, and if 14 lakh schools are there in the country, 1.4 million, who are the role models? You. Because you'll set the ball rolling for a child-friendly school where well-being is the paramount monitor to be achieved. And if these are the Millennium Development Goals for schools to internalize as an achievement factor, it might sound very philanthropic to look at 8 Millennium Development Goals, but the United Nations 189 countries, when they sat down to sign these treaties, they actually realized that forget health sector, forget social justice sector, forget youth and sports. Education sector is the leader and principals are the leaders who can actually achieve the nation's Millennium Development Goals, what you see here. Are we doing that? It's a question to go back and think. These are given on the websites of the country, and our Prime Minister has signed this. We come to understand that by 2015, we would probably not be achieving even less than half of what we have promised the world as a nation, which includes education, gender, which includes involvement of communities for education, which includes maternal health, child mortality. And therefore, we look at well-being. So I'll end with a couple of statistics to think upon. And it's the Government of India's great effort that we are a nation which is now documenting what we are supposed to achieve. And it was not very far away that this has happened as a reality. Now, as a nation where 2 to 4 million children are supposed to go to schools under the RTE Act every year, and about 200 million to go to schools in the next 20 years, I think it's time that role modeling schools, the greatest of the schools who are role models, who can even influence 4 government schools in the neighborhood to become partners in action for human development. We look at that partnership. Nearly 14 to 18% of children suffer incessantly from emotional behavioral learning problems. And let us be warned by our own government and data from WHO, it is the urban elite metro schools who are probably going to be the role models in some of the riskiest behaviors coming from the community. Today morning, I was just sharing with ma'am, one boy and yesterday one girl have been admitted in my hospital for almost a near-death experience with cocaine and weed. And the school principal has found that in the blazer pockets, something which would be worth at least 1 lakh rupees. And this is not something very less. I'm just sharing with you. You might say that, oh, 10,000 mein ek hoga. No, it is huge in numbers and it is influencing the best of the best. Because one, affordability, accessibility, availability of these things. Therefore, risky situations like anti-bullying campaigns in schools, I'm sure all of you are doing it. Are we taking up initiatives like these? We'll talk about that. I'll end with this. There are a couple of paper cuttings because that will set the ball rolling for our first impression coming from. The entire HRD now looks at certain child development indicators as part of pedagogy. And it's so actually heartening to see that teacher education universities and teacher education colleges are now taking in child psychology, child well-being, child development as an important part of curriculum besides the syllabi what I'm supposed to. Now, if we are ranked, look at 112th in the world, this is just 1 year back, in child development index, where Thailand, Nepal, Burma, Sri Lanka seems to be a little better than us, more in terms of sanitation and hygiene of children. It's time that we wake up. We don't know why depression or anxiety or violence is going to be the 3rd or 4th highest killer in the world, but WHO says that. And the Indian subcontinent is going to be the hub for suicides. We have heard of 43 to 45 suicides in the IITs in the last 5 years. And the previous HRD minister sanctioned 50 to 60 lakh rupees for starting a mandatory psychological center in all the IITs. We have some friends from Chennai here, our seniors and colleagues. Chennai IIT has been the leader in identifying the need for emotional counseling of the freshers, because a lot of them come to IITs and they don't want to be engineers anymore. I think nobody knows better than this than the school leaders like you. With all the career counseling done, with all the best knowledge taken, they don't seem to be happy with what they are choosing in life. Lifestyle disorders, again, schools as the platform for awareness and advocacy and campaigns. India is going to be the hub in the next 10 years for all the lifestyle disorders. We were the noted hub for all the tropical problems. But we are going to be for obesity, diabetes, maladjustment with peer group, teenage issues, and nothing less than something like abuse. The POCSO law has come in. You are all aware. We are looking at 23 to 27 lakh children dying every year with the hope of living through common problems like infections and first aid facility available. Is my school be the school leader in providing the basic facility for that? This debate has often happened. I think it is really important for you to share with us any experiences of how success stories with very good emotional well-being has created achievers. Does this strike you? This was made by a 9th standard child as a collage. When it was questioned about what do you see as a classroom today? So children agree now that IQ may be important, but for me EQ and EI seem to be more important because you can only help me to be emotionally more stable. A lot of best research in the world, which used to happen earlier in America, has come from all over the world, that in the post-recession era, many of the companies and the corporates that, and the banks, investment banks that collapsed actually, were people with high IQ CEOs. You see Daniel Goleman's research, you'll get it in that book. And high EQ CEOs survived the economical crisis. It's happening to India also. If life skills, values, well-being and other parameters can be offered with systematic evaluation and monitoring with participation of children, chances are, we're not talking about CC, we're talking about well-being. Who is an emotionally intelligent teacher therefore? It's an open debate now. Is this a problem? Is this a challenge for you? Yeah. We are not far away. We are not far away to have detox and de-addiction centers for electronic addiction. There's already one in Delhi, there's one in Bombay coming up, because America has huge scores of detox centers for children addicted to Facebook, internet, and cyberbullying and cybercrime, because they undergo certain sessions, both with medication also. The world is not very ugly, but it is good, important to know that yes, a lot of teenage offenders seem to be much early, before even puberty onset. Victims of sexual assault getting younger, and the predators are getting brutal. These are good researches happening in India, because we are a nation where we didn't do much R&D for people who receive education in the classroom. So inter-ministerial dialogues, that means inter-school dialogue, inter-school leadership dialogue. It will help us to devise better. I don't know how this is important, but this is my last slide. Yes, Lakshmi was wondering what's gone wrong with me. But does it call for a debate with school leaders? Say a 8th standard girl is a victim of child sexual abuse at home and reports to the principal ma'am, who's the best friend for me, because my mom and dad don't listen to me. What are you supposed to do? You're first not supposed to help the child, you're supposed to file an FIR against the family. How crucial for the school, how devastating for the school. But the law has come, so school leaders need to stand up to question this law. One, you're trying to help the child, because POCSO says you need to have a school committee for any child abuse. And nowadays child abuse is exploited also, because pedagogy is suffering more than the family. Largest number of abuse happens in the family sometimes, but the school is to be blamed even for a small disciplinary action against a child for creating ruckus on the campus. We have had so many cases to be evaluated, but maybe as a healthcare provider and learning from educationists like you, it's time that we stand up through forums like these and ask the government that please make partnerships important with the government so that we don't suffer the child. Right. So we are back here. Now the media agrees that life skills for a better living. We have come to that. How this is going to be helping improving progressive society through the school education and large number of families, because we are looking at nothing less than 12,000 people coming under the scope of one school minimum. 3,000 children means 12,000 people as a family. So you can actually bring about a change in the mindset of 12,000 people, 14,000 people through the messages you create for well-being in schools. With these words, I'll hand over to Lakshmi ma'am. I'm sure. Thank you so much. We'll have a dialogue on this. And please do share your experiences in being a school leader in creating these atmospheres and climates in school. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Nagpal. It's always difficult to speak after your presentation because it really gives such an overview. We thought we will convert this session into a bit of a talk show rather than a workshop and let it be more interactive. Just to complement and supplement what you have presented, I see three important paradigm shift that we need to have as school leaders. I'm not saying anything new, it's a highly educated audience and a highly experienced audience, so I'm probably reinforcing and paraphrasing all our thought processes. One is, of course, we know that schools cannot anymore exist, or it could never exist, but more so in any kind of a moral and ethical vacuum space. Because on one hand, our children come from very, very different family dynamics where there are contradictions and paradoxes thrown, and then we have been giving a set of values and value education. So we need to help children evaluate what their experiences are and come to a judgment. So helping children make choices, helping children make decisions, whether it is a pedagogic choices or whether it's a subject matter choices or it's about life value choices. I think we need to give them more and more the skill of decision making. I think the second and the most important thing for us is that I think as leaders, as educators, we are able to catch up with them on the technology pace. You know, yeah, we are not really there because we know that a 3-year-old can operate all the gizmos much better than us. Okay, and we are quite proud when our grandchildren or our children can handle it better. But I don't know if you're really able to catch up with them in their social emotional space. I think we are finding it difficult to imagine a world which is going to be very, very distinctly different from what we have grown up with. Whether it is a materialistic choice, I mean, our children find it very strange that we didn't get a watch to wear until the first 10th grade exam, you know. Many of us belong to that generation. That, you know, getting a watch was something. And then suddenly they're like, what? I mean, we need an iPad when we are now 4 years old. So this is the kind of huge materialistic difference of the world that we come from. And then, of course, the complexities of an emotional, social, psychological, moral, and spiritual space. So I think a bigger challenge is going to be bridging this world gap for us as leaders, as educators. How am I going to imagine what's going to be relevant for my students from 20 years from now? So I think this is where I think we need the school well-being agenda requires ability to envision the unimaginable. So it's almost that we need to take a new avatar of, you know, how do we enter this under the skin of a 3-year-old to imagine a life after he or she becomes 20. So it's going to, and to make irrelevant choices, I think that's going to be difficult, to let go what we've been very familiar with and to embrace what's going to be relevant for them, even if it doesn't fit with my framework. Which comes to the third very, very important point, I think, for school leaders, if we really want to ensure the school well-being, adaptability skills. I think we are thrown with everyday new circulars, new regulations, new bills and new challenges. And I think, how are we going to adapt and bring that change into the classrooms? And I think if we as leaders show this ability to adapt, it percolates into the system. But I think many of us are very, very resistant to this change because we are very afraid of the unknown. We are very afraid of the unfamiliar, and we know only our point of reference. So I think this letting go for a while to move towards that. And I often say to my teachers, you know, that school leaders and school system as an entity holds, if you have a school of population of 1,500 students, you're holding a 1,500 umbilical cord. Can you imagine that, that image? Because everything that happens in school today becomes a news, oftentimes negative. So it almost everything becomes a controversy. So you have to have that kind of a sensitivity to handle it. The last point is that I want to share, since Dr. Nagpal spoke so much about the learning environment. I have this model called 8 R's. I want to just narrate the 8 R's and leave you to think about it. I'm sorry I'm not able to show it on the screen because of this adaptability issue, okay? And it's available on the Orchid School website, so you can Google it. It's nothing new. It's just putting things together in a little more, comprehensive, little more meaningful way. The first R, I'm not putting this in the order of importance or hierarchy, but just reading it out, the responsibility R, the first R. And when I say this is the school learning environment, it's a learning environment for all stakeholders. I'm talking from the management to the community, but of course there are important everyday stakeholders, so the students and the facilitators, the teachers. So the first is the responsibility for action, for the public space. These two are very, very important, that our children, our students need to know that they are responsible for what they have inherited and what they have to pass on. The second R is a reflective space. And I think we are today talking about in our pedagogic discourse that we need to reflect on what are the relevant choices. Is it really genuinely important for them? Because you have a huge smorgasbord, a huge platter, so to say. And every day there is something new. Yesterday it was IQ, then it was EQ, it was SQ, and then there's going to be TQ. I heard the technology quotient, and there will be more Qs, okay? So how do we make these choices and prioritize, Every 1 minute, 10th standard time, it's all about performance Q. It's all about scores. And then we say, but no, take care of the EQ. So how do we juggle these choices is based on the reflection that we need to have. Then the very, very significant is the relationship, the third R. I think children spend formative years at home as a primary social institution and a secondary social institution, or I'm even beginning to call school as a para-primary social institution, that we have become surrogate parents in some sense. It's almost that you take care of everything and just send the child home. So the relationship R, the third one, is extremely crucial. Ability to make and keep. And that's very important, that it's also about skills. The fourth very important R is the regulation R. It's a free will society. Children today talk about freedom of choice and freedom of expression, but the flip side is there is a responsibility, there is a regulation. The freedom always is within a framework, that it's not a joyride. That there are regulatory panels, there is a framework. And yes, their framework is different from our framework, but we need to define the framework. And when I say regulatory, I do not mean to propagate repressive processes, but disciplinary processes. And I think we need to have that. And discipline is a very, very subjective matter of choice and subjective matter for debate, but there are some common grounds and common denominators. So that's the fourth R. And the fifth is the readiness, that at the end of any process, you got to be ready. You cannot be eternally in, you can be the work in progress mode, but you got to be in a performance mode. You got to be ready to deliver. So I think that's a very important agenda for the school. And readiness is not just about career and job delivery, but it's also about relationship delivery. That you need to be able to, because at the end of the day, society expects you to be a productive member of the society, productive, positive, and liberated member of a society. So I think this is an important readiness that we need to prepare our students for. And the sixth R is the respect. I don't think I need to even elaborate on that. It's a very much spoken word. All we need to do is to understand as facilitators, probably the expression of respect is going to be different as generational changes happen. That how we expressed our respect for our teachers, our parents, is going to be different from how our young learners are expressing their respect. So we need to have a paradigm shift to understand their idea of respect. And the seventh R is a rich experience, that we have a huge responsibility to give rich experiences in the classroom, outside the classroom, and also to absorb their everyday life. Children live an everyday rich experience, social, emotional, familial, rich life. And when I say rich, it's not only positive, there could even be negative experience. but to help children process it and accommodate it in their learning space. That's the seventh, and the last is reward. I think life will have both positive and negative consequences, but if in school spaces, if they can experience reward for efforts and the outcome, and so that their positive self-esteem is built, and of course also reward is to build in some failure chances. The possibility for a student to fail and reflect on within a safe space, so that they actually truly become the one that can embrace both up and down. So these are the 8 R's that I feel are very, very crucial for school well-being. So yeah, Dr. Nagpal, does it make sense to you?
Definitely. Thank you so much. I think you've invoked another line of thought. We can now have a couple of opinions from the esteemed audience also. From systemic reforms as a school leader for learning techniques and teaching learning environments, to the systemic reforms for indicators that are meant for learning in a child. And I think you've given a clue to those indicators, which I'll quote Amartya Sen. Social, emotional, and maybe well-being indicators as a learning curve of the 21st century child, besides the learning techniques which are part of the globalization of the world, which we are doing, which we should, because we need to be updated across the globe what is happening, and we need to be on the interface. But do social, emotional, and well-being indicators then become partners as part of the learning curve of a child? Have you come across The Uncertain Glory, the book by Amartya Sen? It is worthwhile to be read by every school leader, because it is not meant for economists. It is not meant for, it is not meant for economists or policymakers. Strangely, it is meant for each citizen who is in the leadership of the next generation. Isn't it, sir? Would you like to add maybe a few emotions from that review? What was the learning experience? Then maybe we can look at the indicators what we are trying to leave across through this session. The one hint which I got, despite all the best economical growth of a GDP and a per capita of a nation, and today's morning newspaper says that we've done reasonably well in the last quarter. What we have done reasonably well, we are yet to identify, but we have done well, besides changing governments very often.
You have more choice to buy cars.
Yes, absolutely, the gizmos and choices. But an economist who's got a Nobel Prize because of what he contributed to the world, besides a thought for Indian economy, says that no economist should be resting in peace unless the goal is happiness and not just wealth of a nation. One. Secondly, he implied that wealth to be children. And education is the first parameter highlighted as the wealth of the nation, not the bank balances on the treasury in the Reserve Bank of India. Second point, social indicators like health, education, gender equality, transport, electricity, and sanitation. Ye indicators an economist is taking up for us and helping us to know that along with the gross product of economy, GDP, are we looking at any gross national happiness? We know Bhutan redefined growth by GDP, no, by GNH, gross national happiness. So can schools be the platform for gross classroom happiness, gross school happiness? And that's saying somewhere the indicators we need to see whether we are doing that. Is it possible to do it without parents or families? No. So then what are the indicators for effective family-school partnerships to create a well-being school, to create a well-being society? That is the second question, which is entirely based on evidence, because we are looking at evidence for those people who are going to be leaders for the nation, and coming from role model schools like ours, from the audience sitting here. Any opinion on this? How are you looking at well-being indicators which you feel are challenging factors? I know we are all agreeing that there's no utopia about no problem in the school. We know problems are there and indicators are multiplying. Daily in the newspapers we see this issues happening. The challenges coming to the school are much higher than challenges coming to the great Indian family. And the problems are actually a lot beyond school hours, like the cyber world, or beyond the scope of the school. But the onus and the incrimination coming on the school. For example, the POCSO. Are we aware of the POCSO amendment or the law that has been passed? Anybody who would like to share the challenges that came because of this? Though it is something very minuscule in nature, but let me tell you, it is a paradox that the number of cases coming for evaluation of a teacher's mental health because of why the teacher, sir is here from Chennai, the case of the teacher who was stabbed in the classroom. Though it is very rare, it may be 1 in 1 lakh, but people like us, that's why it is a humble plea to the education leaders. We get about 2 cases per week referred by the Child Welfare Committee of the government to evaluate the psyche of a teacher. What is abnormal in this teacher? Or anything that is indirect. A school being questioned that why the teacher showed a little difficult behavior to this child. Because parents are cognizant, but because we probably do not interact much with families beyond the PTMs and the report cards.
Yes, anyone?
Yeah, yes sir. Because the best have to be further the best. So this is the right choice of a platform where you can actually establish a concurrence of opinion.
Can you hear me? Yes.
Yes sir, thank you.
Good morning, sir. I'm coming from Gujarat. My name is Kanal Shekhar and part of 3 schools. One is residential, 2 of them are day schools, and 1 is a high-end school. The other 2 come from lower middle class backgrounds. We found that a large number of children are struggling, and we try to work it out as to how we can go forward. In all the 3 schools, including the residential school, for the last 3 years, this is our 3rd year, we have introduced the concept of home visits at least twice a year by the teacher to the home. Initially, as is usual with schools, we had a lot of resistance from both the parents, the students, and of course the teachers. Right. But today, we are very happy to say that it has made a huge difference. Even cases where Papa is beating up Mama, please help us. The 2nd standard student is telling the teacher, and we are, without the rules or without the power to have, somewhere we have managed to get some moral authority to find it out. Even more in the Adivasi school, which we have as a public-private partnership, visiting the homes of the students where sanitation and every other aspect is a challenge, brought tears to the eyes of the teachers, and they understand the students better. So at a very small level, we are trying to make some kind of change, and this is something which has hugely impacted on the way the students are performing in the school, in the sense they say, when we come to the school, hum teacher ko sab bol sakte hain. Thank you, sir.
I think just to, take the thread from this POCSO, in the family school partnership and this, especially with this POCSO Act, the Act is quite explicit, and of course it has put a lot of onus on the school. But before we even arrive at it, I think a lot of homework needs to be done. I think one is, of course, to sensitize the teachers, because today, what's a good touch and what's the bad touch itself is a huge debate. And the other hand is to educate the students to report, appropriately, because while this really empowers all of us, but it also can be easily misconstrued and misused by the management, by the teachers, by the parents, or by the students. So it's a very, very sensitive tightrope walk. And also to talk to the parents about that actually if it happens at home and if you don't inform, this itself can be a criminal act, that you're actually conniving or you're actually hiding the, the abuse that has happened. So one is to create this entire sensitivity awareness campaign on a very big platform. But what I notice more and more is that when it happens within a school system, we find it very hard to talk about it, especially, suddenly there is this group loyalty that happens, that when finally this whole thing explodes on the face, then everyone says, "Mujhe pata tha ki this teacher was, behaving like this, but why did you not bring it up? Why did you not stand up and proactively communicate this to the leaders?" The second thing, I think what we notice is with the students, a huge dilemma, that how is this very loving, trusting adult could actually trespass that line. So I think children go through a lot of moral, emotional dilemma before they actually can come and communicate. And it happened with us that, they actually for a very long time were very confused. Is it an affectionate touch, or is it really a very lovely, loving adult, hug, or is it something else? But I think we need to empower and educate our students that when you feel uncomfortable, and when you have expressed that, no, I don't want this, and this adult continues to disrespect, and I think that's the point to say that, no, I need to stand up. And the fourth most important thing is that, my school made headlines for this, and everybody was upset. I said, you know what, we are made headlines for the right reason, that we stood up for the child's cause. Yes, you will be pulled, though the act says that your name should not be flashed, a school name will not come up, and that, then everything else is kept as a confidentiality, but there is nothing confidential about it, where they will tell you that this area, this school, well known, and they'll put a building in a very hideous way, and you're out, okay? But I think what's important is to bind the community and say that, yes, we hit the front page, but what's the reason that we stood up for the child's right? And I think we need to have the self-confidence as leaders to say that under any circumstance that I stand up for the child's voice. And I think if this fundamental clarity is there with us, and I think then the child knows that this is one space where this will be heard. And we have had very, very positive experience with the judicial system, and I must say this, that actually when the system, the judicial system stands up and says your voice and your words are important, I think we have moved one step closer to what Sen's dream of making a nation that is really child-centric.
You had something to add, sir?
Yeah, something very important. Yes, sir. Something very important is, introduction of sex education in schools. Very, very important. We still have an hush-hush attitude. And the word sex itself is very badly misinterpreted. And so that is why the child does not know the intention of a pat or a hug or a compliment. Secondly,
yes,
parents have to be educated on this front. Very important is that the parent has to give time to the child. Today in this materialistic world, parents do not have time for the children. And so they do not know the day-to-day activities, or they are unable to observe a behavioral change, the child receding to himself or herself. Because of all this, we are having, the school moral also going down and the society moral also going down. So educating the parent, workshop for parents, counseling for parents, that their purpose of living is not just earning money, but ensuring the future of the child. We have parents saying, ma'am, we do not have time for our children. Ma'am, it is a responsibility of the school.
Good that you raised this topic, ma'am. The whole parameter for defining how does a family-school partnership then become effective. I think the demand now is that every class from, say, kindergarten till 12 needs to be brought together for orientation periodically, at least twice a year. Nothing less than that. It won't work otherwise. Because what majority of the schools would do is on a report card day, have a half an hour orientation for parents or 1 hour. It doesn't work. There are parents who may not like to be sitting for more time in schools, but we need to then tap out the human resource of parents. There are so many moms who are willing to conduct workshops for your school. I'm sure. There are gynecologists, there are doctors, there are psychologists, there are so many MBAs and chartered accountants who can actually be coming forward to do career counseling of your own students. So wherever the possibility of involving a family, then the chances of sending such messages that we need to give time to children, we need to know them better, we need to know their literacy and education, emotional skills better, because you are the best, because you're the school leader, creating a better school for tomorrow. Are we creating a better family as the head of the family, as a mother, father? That dichotomy, what ma'am is saying is, the child is unknowingly manipulating. It's not the child's fault anyway. Because the values we learn at the school, through the curriculum given to us by the government or whichever board, does not translate into practice at home. And children are the sufferers. Why do you think most of the young drug addicts, I may not call them addicts also, people who try, abuse drugs, say 13, 14-year-olds, or even smoking, you actually evaluate their personality traits, they are the confused children, not the ones who intended to go into drugs. Because they didn't know what else to do to get away from the reality of certain dichotomies like what you said. The conflict between family ka problem ye hai aur school ye sikhata hai.
Seema has given us this time-out smile, so we end here. Just to add on to that, I think we need to be very careful that we do not create sex education as another pedantic text lesson. Because I think that's the problem, that we quickly put workbooks and question answers and session 1 and session 2 and make it very, very clinical. But sex education is all about power and gender and exploitation and respect and relationship. So I think this is also a specialist job, and I think we should not hesitate to seek. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nagpal and Ms. Lakshmi Kumar, for enlightening us on this topic. We would now break for tea for 15 minutes and reassemble for the next session.